or tactical team.
Hey there guys, this is me and Malorian, and this is going to be another Orc Tactical Team. We're on such a roll here, I think I'm just going to stick with it. Now, in the past, we were talking about why battle boxes suck for new players and getting them into the game, why journeyman leagues suck and getting into the game, and I got quite a few comments saying, well, Lorian, what's with all this negativity? You're saying everything sucks, and if all this thing sucks, well, at least say what you should be doing or what you do. And I thought, you know what? Let's make that the topic of this Orc Tactical Team. I have been running demos for a very long time, if not just for War Machine, but for Fantasy and 40k. So I wanted this one to be specifically about how I go about running demos for new players and bringing them into the game. Now, I think the very first thing you got to say when you're going to bring something into a new game is you got to know what they're after. So the first thing I'll do is I'll talk to them and I'll find out that, okay, well, what exactly are you looking for? Are you looking for a game that you're going to be playing competitively? Or are you looking for something just for a little bit of fun on the side? You know, is it we're just going to be hanging out, you know, like once a month with a buddy and with some beer and have some fun? Or do you plan to go events? Like, where do you actually see yourself going with this? Because that's really going to change how you're going to try and bring them into the game. If there's someone who's just looking for something strictly very casual, well, then you don't need to get into a lot of stuff and you can get into things a lot slower and a lot easier. If it's a person who's looking to be like, you know what, I want this to be a very strong competitive game, I want to go to tournaments and events, alright then, let's try and up this up a little bit here, and we're going to try and jump right into this. Now, I think the very next step then, step number 2, is after you realize what they're trying to get out of it, the second thing is, what's their experience level? So, I'll ask them, what type of tabletop games have you played before? I even ask, like, what board games have you played before if they don't have any tabletop gaming experience. Because if they're a person who has played other tabletop games, be it Warhammer or Fantasy or some other one, well, that's great. That's a big, huge building block. That means this person is used to already getting models, building the models and painting them. They're used to looking at the stats and how the numbers work. Sure, the mechanism, whether it's 2d6 or multiple single d6s, you know, that could be different, but in general, if they have already been playing another game like Fantasy or not War Machine or Warhammer, well, then that's a great basis to know that they can handle a lot more. Now, even if they say that they haven't played games like this, but let's say they played a different game, say like Magic the Gathering, well, okay, how deep are you getting into that game? Is it again a thing where you just kind of did for fun, or you're pretty far into it? Because again, if it turns out that this is a person where like, oh yeah, I was really into Magic the Gathering, and I would make sure to always have like this top deck, and I'd always try and stay on top of my game and researching other stuff, great. That means I know exactly the type of player you are. Whereas if it's something else like, oh yeah, you know, I just kind of bought some boxes for fun and, you know, I played some games with my buddies over the weekend while we watched movies or something. Okay, again, that kind of explains things. And again, even if they don't play that and they don't play the Magic the Gathering, well, maybe they do board games. And even from that, knowing that, okay, what board games do you play? Are we talking like Risk? Or are we talking more like Power Grid? Or, you know, what type of games are there? Because if you realize they're playing a lot more of the in-depth tactical games that have a lot more to them, alright, that means this is a person that's going to be a lot more easier to get into all these complex rules, whereas it's a person who's like, oh yeah, you know, I play Coup, or I play some of those simpler games, even something like Catan is not too bad, but if something like, you know, Resistance, then it's like, okay, they're probably after something a little bit simpler. Or another one might be Cards Against Humanity. And they say that, it's like, okay, I think they're generally more after something just for fun, and they're probably not to more used to all these complex rules. So that's important, you know? And so a lot of times if I have somebody contact me and say, hey, I'm new to the area, I'm looking for a game, or hey, I just learned about this War Machine and you're the press ganger, the first thing I'll do is I'll start that dialogue. Before I start setting up like, alright, come over to my house at this time, it's like, hey, how's it going? What type of games have you played in the past? What are you looking to get from it? And that first stage is very important. Well, what do you do with all that information? Well, I really use that then to decide how I want to introduce them to the game. Now, I think from the very top part of it, where I can tell that this is a person who wants to be very competitive and they're very used to the rules, I jump right into it. I will go there and I'm going to make two 75-point lists and I'm going to say, hey, let's go play this demo game completely, showing everything so you know exactly what you're getting into and you get to see the full spectrum. Now, when I make these lists, now, you have to keep in mind that Privateer Press, when they do their battle boxes, they try and be very careful to make them balanced against each other. Well, when I'm making these two 75-point lists, I'm doing it a little bit differently. I mean, of course, I don't want to set up a huge advantage for one side. If one side has all the guns and the other side has all the stealth and ignores the guns, well, great. You're not going to get very much from that game. You want to have some things that will counter the other side, but some things will do well against the other side. So there's a little bit of balance work there. And it's, I mean, people say, and I got these comments saying like, oh, you don't do these things like Dreaming League because you're lazy. You don't want to do the work. Ha! This is a lot more work to try and set this up, because after I'm done that, I'm trying to decide what type of forces would be good to face each other. I want to make sure there's a good spectrum on both sides. I want to be picking a warcaster that's fairly easy, but does something, right? I don't want somebody who just walks up, does an aura, and doesn't do anything. I want a caster that's more a support caster. I want a caster that's going to be there and wanting to put out spells, has a more like a supportive midline caster, right? This is a one where it's not just staying in the back and doing those spells. It's ones that want to do it somewhere from the middle of the field, putting out that feat, and then also can get a little bit work done too if they need to. That's what I find is the best thing to use. Then past that, when it comes to the battle group, I want to have something combat centric and something rain centric. So if I'm trying to do this, say like with Signar, I'd make sure that I put a defender in there, and then I also want to be putting in there like a stormclad, so that, all right, they're both jacks, but look, they have very different purposes. I might, depending on the point size, throw in some lights as well, but I definitely want to show that these are jacks, and this is how jacks work. Some of them swing a sword, some of them shoot a gun. Then I get into the units. And I mean, again, that's a big difference between what you see in battle boxes to here. I make sure units are in the game. And I make sure that there's a shooty unit, a combat unit, and that one of those, at least, if there's just those two, is going to be a cav unit. Because I want them to see how the cav work and that there's these faster units. And then at the same time, I want to have solos in there. So they're seeing the full spectrum. They're coming in here and they're having a caster that's doing spells that can swing if they need to and has, you know, a reasonable feat. You don't want to pick a feat on a caster that's going to be overwhelming. You know, if a caster like Haley 2 that comes in and just like shuts you down, or Gorton, or something like that, that's really just going to really have a dominating effect on the game. You want something that's like, hey, Beth Maddox, we're going to be going in there, and she can do some supporting casting. She has a feat that's pretty simple, right? +3 strength and beat back. And then if she needs to, she can swing that sword too. That's the area I'm looking for that starting caster. And then, of course, like I said, I'll make sure to have something like a Stormclad, a Defender. I'll throw the Storm Lances in there, maybe some Gun Mages or some Long Gunners, get a couple of solos in there, bring it up to 75, and there you go. And all of a sudden now I got this package that I can get into the game, and it almost is the same thing. Like, I get people telling me like, oh, well, if you go and you do this full game, you're going to have to go and do so much more explaining. It really isn't. Because when you think about it, if you do a battle box and you have to explain how it is to use your jacks, jacks are very complicated. You know, all of a sudden they have focus that you have to worry about being within range, and you can only allocate so many, and they get a free one you have to remember about, and then you can do power attacks, and they can boost and buy, and wow, they've got a damage grid that you have to worry about different rules. Well, if you take that and say, well, this is a unit, and basically all the stats work out like before, but you don't care about focus or fury, you don't care about power attacks, you don't care about like a damage grid. All you care about is this model is the leader, and yeah, they all have to be within range of them. Well, how do they run in charge and stuff? It's just like a jack, where you have to declare what you're doing, whether it's a regular advance or a charge or a run, and they just can't do those other things like tramples and stuff. Well, then how about solos? Well, solos are really just units where there's just one guy. So you don't have to even worry about the command issue. So really explaining that part is pretty easy. Of course, you want to be picking units that are fairly simple and not overly complex. I mean, even if I go and I pick someone like, say, like the Tempest Blazers, I might throw them in there. It's like, yeah, they're basically just a unit of dudes, and they work just like anything else, but they have a choice of 3 shots. And then right away, instead of sitting there going like, okay, these are the 3 shots, this is what they do. Listen, this is basically what they do. They shoot, and either they get to pick an extra dice of damage, or they're going to get an Electro Leap. That's what it's going to come down to. Oh, okay, let's move on, right? And then, of course, you can even leave some things out of the initial discussion, because you don't want to sit down there and really be talking for an hour. You want to get through those main rules, get into the game, and then as these interactions start happening, that you can plan and make happen, right? If you're running the demo, you can line up the matchup so that these interactions happen. Then you can be like, oh, right, okay, do you want to see something really cool? This is how this works here. You know how it's really hard to kill these guys because they're hard defense? Shoot these guys with Electro Leap, and it's going to jump over to them. And of course, I guess the big thing to say with that is, of course, when you're running a demo game, you want them to win. You want them to be having fun. You don't want to go into a demo game and just be like, you did, get out of here. You want to be more like, okay, here's this game, here's all the rules, this is what it looks like, let's play a game. And then you don't want to be like super stupid. Like if they don't go in and contest a zone, you're going to be like, all right, I'm going to take a point, but you don't surprise them with it. You'd have to be more like, okay, just so you know, this turn is when you can first score, so you really got to make sure you have something in there, and you want to make sure it's something I can't take out too easily, otherwise I'm going to score. Now, with that, I think I should also say that I definitely go straight in with a scenario. Now, the easiest scenario that I love to use is just a single circle. You take your 12-inch circle, throw it in the middle, one control for 1, dominate for 2, first person to 5, there you go. Now, one of the things I do like to take out, because I find it is a little bit too complicated, is I feel that I like in the first game to take out terrain. Now, I do always say that I want this game to be as close to what the real game is as possible, but I find that terrain is just that extra layer that I don't really want to have there. Because it's just that extra problem and those extra rules on the cards that you have to explain. Okay, now we have to get into Pathfinder. Now we have to start talking about the spells that give out that. Now these rules that ignores concealment. Oh, now we have to talk about Prowl and all these types of things here. It's more so, you know what? For this first one here, let's mainly take out all this terrain. And really, because we're playing that one centric circle scenario, it doesn't really matter either. A lot of stuff is moving to the center, and it's really just forcing you to fight, which is really the biggest deal. So I don't really add that terrain in that first game. Now, that's what we're talking about with this high-level player. This is a person who's coming in that has played other games, really understands tactical situations, and you can throw them into this situation. Well, what happens if you start going levels lower? And I'm not really saying, you know, as we go levels lower, that these people are lesser people. They just have less experience playing these tactical tabletop games. That's all it is. Simple as that. Well, if it's a little bit lower in terms of, let's say, for example, this person plays some game, but it's not very into it. You know, like, oh yeah, you know, I don't really play 40K or fantasy before this. I did some Magic the Gathering just for fun, but that's really it. Okay, so this person understands list building and countering and stuff like this, but they're not fully into the system. Well, what that probably means is that for starters, when I'm having this conversation with them, I get to spend a little bit more time explaining the fact that we now have cards with very important stats on them. Because people like that then don't really understand, like, oh, you have something that really defines like what your speed is and your strength and stuff like that. Oh, okay. But at the same time, I really still try and take them to that same level. As it goes further down, and by the same level, I mean the full game and the full aspects where everything's there, the one jack with a sword, one jack with a gun. However, we start getting down, and we're talking about a person who barely plays at all, and they're like, yeah, you know, I've played some chess when I was a kid, and sometimes we get together and play some Risk, and, you know, I think back when I was a kid I played Snake and Ladders. It's just that my buddies play this War Machine game, I don't want to see what it's all about. Alright, these guys need to be a lot simpler and brought in, and I think at this point here, what I do is I go and I make the game a little bit lower. Again, I like going in with the full set if possible, but when you got this stage here where they really have no understanding for it, I bring it down. Now, do I bring it all the way to Battle Box? No. I have never liked running a Battle Box game. I did that, I think like 2 or 3 times I get a demo with a Battle Box game, and I had such a negative experience that I never did that again. I mean, like I said, I have experience coming back from 40K in Fantasy, and in those ones, I did pretty much full demos, and it worked out great. And it's almost weird that you get here to War Machine, and they have this idea they should really be pushing these battle boxes that gives a skewed game. I don't like doing that, but I'm not going to talk about that again, because I've already done 2 videos on it. What I find for this is you bring it down more to, before I call it the 35-point level, but now it'd be more so like the 50-point layer, or something like that, where you're trying to get everything in there, but just make it a little bit less, so that it's manageable, right? And of course, when you're trying to pick those lists, and trying to pick the models that are going into it, pick ones that are even simpler. All of a sudden, that'd be things like, okay, long gunners are a perfect unit for this. Hey, these are dudes with guns, and if they aim, they get 2 shots. That's it. Pretty simple. Or I might go something like the halberdiers, right? The steelhead halberdiers. Hey, these guys got halberdiers. If they charge, they hit a little bit harder, and if they get charged, they're harder to hit because they got set defense. Pretty simple stuff. Even that one like could be seen as like okay, there's a few extra rules there, but I mean, there's also a thing too where you can go into the games and you don't have to read these things, right? Like if I go in here and I'm reading press gangers, right? And I'm like, okay, these press gangers, they're really interesting. They have advanced deploy, there's an officer rule because the last is different, and they have tough, and you gotta remember they got gangs. When there's 2 of them, you get +2 to hit and +2 damage, and the last, she's special because she has seduction, and they also have Shanghai, so when they get in there and they're doing the gang and there's like 2 guys, and it has to be living, remember it has to be living, then you can Shanghai and you get another guy in the unit, and yeah, that's really what the press get. Okay, you bring it down to this. These are press gangers. They're cheap throwaway guys, which are pretty fast, and they're kind of tough, and they like to fight where there's more than one person at once. So if you can like gang up on guys, they get extra bonuses. And that's all you gotta say, right? Really simple, move along, and then when you get into the game, you're like, alright, you know how you just went here and you got the guys in the gang? The reason why they love it is because they're getting +2 to hit and +2 damage. Isn't that awesome? Oh look, you just took out my guy? Now look what happens. The reason why they're called press gangers is that they're gonna press gang somebody into your own group. So you just got bigger because you're taking my guys to your side. And maybe later on you even set it up so that somebody goes into the zone to contest, so they're really hard to get out. You're like, okay, now this is where another rule comes in, and it's called seduction. Take that last, move it over there, and basically you make kissy faces, and he leaves the zone. And just like that, it's just simple like that. And they're like, wow, this is awesome. And again, it's about how you portray this and bring it over. You look at the back of this card, and it can be super complicated, but if I'm talking to a person who's not used to these rules and these mechanics, I make it as simple as possible, and then really move that talk over so that if it happens during the game, then I bring it in. And again, if I'm playing the game, and I'm realizing that my opponent is really struggling with the rules, I can tell that, man, this really is something new, and this is already a lot, I just won't make those things happen, right? As a game happens, I might not even mention the fact that you're getting gang right now, or that you're actually Shanghaiing or have the possibility to be seducing things. I'll just let that flow. The fact that you're using a unit and you're jamming it in there and doing cool things, you know, I'll just try and make that to make things smooth. And I think that's where you have to really take that power as a press ganger, to be really watching your opponent, are realizing how they're doing and changing the game as you go. And again, that can happen with your competitive player. If you're playing with this person that knows all these rules and you're playing the game and they're kind of like leaning back and like, all right, so like this is what this game is, start talking more tactics. Start saying like, okay, you have these guys here? Well, positioning is very important. Put these guys up here to kind of block all the charges because of free strikes, and now these guys can be further back. I know how you're used to 40k and how they can kind of all be clumped together, but now positioning is very important, and you gotta watch front arcs. Boom, all of a sudden you can start pulling them back in. So watching your opponent and seeing if they're having fun, seeing how frustrated they might be getting with the rules or the game so far should really lead you to how you're going to be then progressing the rest of the game. And then of course, you always want to try and set up so that they win in the end or you help them win. Now, it doesn't stop there. So that's your first demo game. You've brought them in, you've got them to play the main game. Now we're on to the second demo. Now, it might not be there, it might be later, depending on timing. You might be like, hey, I'm glad you came over, you had lots of fun. When are you free for another game? Because I'd love to run you through another demo and show you some other cool things. Or, hey, we have gaming nights every night on this here, and this is where you can show up. Why don't you come out and meet all the guys? And when they come out there, then we start coming to the second round of the demo. And this is where I really like the idea of making them make their own list. What I'll do then is I'll give them the cards or the list that we played last time, and I'll say, all right, this is what we played last time. You can use this if you want, but I want you to have the opportunity to change it if you want. Were there any models that really didn't seem to work for you? Or was there an aspect of the game you really liked? Oh yeah, I really liked the shooting. Or, oh yeah, I really liked how fast the Cavs were. Well, okay, that's great. We got these other options here. These are the points. You really can do whatever you want. So pick whatever you want, make sure that you don't go over 75 points, and that's really it. And if you really want to, there's these other casters if you'd like. They will change the jack points a bit, but otherwise it's pretty simple. And I let them make the list. The only difference here is that if it's a very competitive player, I'll say, all right, this is where another layer comes into War Machine where we have two lists to make things balance. I want you to make two lists. So I even push them that far. And if I do that with them, then in that game, I'll say, all right, this is my list. Look at this one list that I'll be using. Pick which one of your two lists you want to be using to face that. Now again, that's the person that's really used to competitive tabletop gaming. If it's a person who has less experience, no. The fact that they're making their list is awesome, and if possible, and if they allow me, I'll actually watch them, see what they build first, so I can quickly change my list so that, first of all, it's something different. You don't want to come back with a second game and be like, hey, here's the same stuff you faced last time. You want it to be different and new and exciting. They want them to see that this is a big part about War Machine. There's all these different models. There's all these different options. Hell, if you can, play a completely different faction. And while you're doing that, again, try and make it so that whatever they choose, that is going to be giving a good game. Again, if they go and they decide, you know what, I want to have more guns. Well, don't change your list to have more stealth, right? Maybe change it so that some of your guys can be easily shot down, but other guys will be a little bit harder to shoot down. It's going to force them to make some changes. Not making it unfair for him, but again, trying to make a balanced game where he has to make, or she has to make very meaningful decisions in the game. Now, the other part of it too, that no matter whether it's competitive or not competitive or whatever have you, I will always start with War Machine. And by that, I don't mean just like the game. I mean, I will avoid hordes like the plague. Because even though the two systems are pretty much the same, I find that the horde system is just that much more complicated to be showing to a new player. The whole new layers were like, okay, now where you're having this, you're going to be forcing your beast, and then you have to like reave off, and if they die, you have to leech, but then you can use some of your fury to heal them, but if you do too much fury, they'll freak out. That's too much. That's something where I just won't really get into, and I'll just really show them that War Machine level. If there's somebody else who's, really into the game, and then they say they're really interested in the horde stuff, that's really going to be coming into the third game. So again, the first game is a demo where I basically try and make it as balanced as possible, and I'm trying to teach you the game. Game 2 is something where I say like, all right, I'm glad you came back and you enjoyed this game. How about you make your list? And now, when it comes to the third one, this is where I want to start pushing a little bit. I want to say like, okay, what are you interested? You've played a couple of games now. I want to start showing you everything there is to offer. Here's all the possible factions, because in the last game I showed you how one faction will have several options within it. Well, look, between War Machine and Hordes, there's a lot of different factions. So depending on what look you like to have in the army, there's probably a lot of things out there. I'll make sure to also point out that one faction will have several aesthetics to it. I mean, if we're looking at Signar, well, they have their trenchers, you have your storm knights, you have your lightning guys, so you have some options there. If you go to the mercenaries, we got our cephalics, we got our pirates, we got our dwarves, we got our other just general ragtag guys. So really, whatever you're looking for, you can probably find something you like the look of. But when it comes to purchases, if you have somebody that really wants to try some stuff, but they don't want to be spending that money yet, hey, sure, try and borrow some of this stuff still. You can proxy these things for a little bit, but this is where I really want to start pushing them and say like, okay, we're getting into this game now. Now's where you have to kind of make this choice whether you want to play it or not. I'm fine trying to help you out and letting you borrow things now and then, but really if you're playing this game, you're going to have to start thinking about buying your own stuff. So look at what faction looks good to you, and then I'll help you from there. And this came up in the other conversations, and the idea was like, well, do you really want them to be spending all this money? Well, the thing is that tabletop games are actually fairly expensive. And if I have somebody who's trying to play the game and they really can't afford stuff, it's like, hey, I love this game, but I don't work and I've been off work for a year and like even $50 is tough, I'd be like, okay, you can come out and you can still borrow things. It's great to have you out here, but just so you know, if it ever comes to down the road where you're wanting to really get into these things, at some point you're going to have to try and get your own models. And the idea of having to spend $140 for an all-in-one box, if that's something that's like, whoa, there's no way I'm dropping $140 on a game, those are serious warning flags. And I know some people say, well, that's elitist. Does this mean that this game is just for people that can afford it? In a way, it kind of is. This is an expensive hobby. If I want to go out and I want to buy this Menoth Jack, it's $42. I'm just looking at a box that's on the floor here. That's $42 right there. And that's one model. There's ways you can get good deals, and that's why I'll really suggest, hey, if you can find all in one box, not only is it a full package, we get a big discount. I'll encourage them to try and find deals on eBay and Kijiji and buy and sell. I'll try my best to bring that price point down, but there comes to be a point where you have to just be honest with the new player and say, hey, this is not a game that just costs $50. This is a game where you're going to have to invest probably at least $300, and if you're a person who wants to really get into this, that number only goes up. And I mean, it's only fair to be honest to your new player. They're the ones coming in here, and you don't want to be that guy that sold them like, hey, you can play War Machine for $50, that's all you need, and then all of a sudden they get in and like, well, no, I didn't. This is just something that's really minuscule. If I want to play War Machine, I have to pay a lot more money, and now I'm $50 in. I'd much rather take that time, go through those stage demos, and then at that point when they're 2 games in, say, all right, now that you've seen what War Machine is all about, from playing the game to all the types of the units to building your own list, now's the time to think about whether it's worth investing or not. And that's going to be a very hard discussion to have, but it's also one that's very important. So there you go, guys. This is a long video, but I felt it was a very important one. I came in all negative talking about the battle boxes sucking and the Journeyman League sucking, and I still do think that's true for trying to bring in new players, but I thought I really have to have this video then to explain what do I do and how do I bring in these new players, because from the experience that I've had over, man, it has been way too long now. I think it's been like almost 15 years I've been playing games in general, maybe even longer. Ooh. I've done a lot of demo games, and this is just my feeling, and these are my opinions, right? Maybe in your area you find that, hey, we really have to go with BattleBox because this is the only way that works to bring people in, or I really feel we have to do it this way. Well, my only answer to that is that if it's working for you, fantastic, do what works for you, but at the same time, it's really good for us to always try and take a second, really ask the question, is the thing I'm doing right now the best thing for me to do? Because if you just go on and keep on doing the same things forever, well, you're never going to improve. If you at least stop for, once a year and ask yourself, is this the right thing? And whether this is the person running the battle boxes or even myself, just having that reanalysis to make sure that you're delivering the right thing to your opponent and the right thing to your new gamers. So there you go, guys. Of course, if you have any other comments or opinions on this, please post it down below. And otherwise, we'll catch you later. Bye.